Grant Sutter did not raise his voice. He never needed to. He said the words the way a man reads a grocery list, standing at the head of the break room, while the pre-shift meeting still radiated fluorescent light off the linoleum, and 40 people watched Aaron Delgado go still in his seat. Effective immediately, employment is terminated for unauthorized shift abandonment and failure to notify management of an early departure. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. That was all of it. 9 years reduced to 2 sentences and a clipboard. Aaron did not argue. He had learned a long time ago that arguing in front of people who have already decided something only gives them a story to tell later about how he'd reacted. He stood, nodded once at Renata Cho near the coffee station, who would not meet his eyes, and walked out past the dock doors into a cold that had teeth in it. He did not go home first. He went to the loading yard behind Bay 4, where a heavy-set woman in a gray custodial jacket was fighting with a trash bin wedged against the curb, and he picked up the other handle without being asked, the way he had done every night for the past 2 weeks, the way he was about to keep doing whether Draymond Logistics employed him or not. If you have ever kept showing up for someone after the world decided you no longer had to, stay with this one. Like this video, subscribe to Hidden Ledger, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Nobody in that yard knew yet what he was about to help carry. Keep watching. Aaron Delgado had worked the Larkspur distribution hub for 9 years, longer than any of the 3 regional directors who had rotated through Draymond's corporate office in that stretch. He started on the dock the summer he turned 25, back when the forklift still stalled without warning, and the roof over Bay 2 leaked whenever the rain came in sideways. He made shift lead 4 years later, not because he asked for it, but because when the previous lead retired, nobody else wanted the extra headache, and everyone agreed Aaron was already doing half the job anyway. Coworkers trusted him the way people trust a person who has never once made his own trouble, someone else's problem to solve. He covered shifts without being asked twice. He remembered which drivers needed a specific dock assignment because of a bad knee, and which crew members were saving for something and could use the overtime nobody else wanted. None of it showed up in a personnel file. It just showed up in the fact that when Aaron's name came up on the floor, nobody had anything bad to say, which was rarer at Draymond than it should have been. He was not a man who complained. His ex-wife, Renee, used to say that like it was an accusation. She left when their daughter Ruby was 4, not because of some single betrayal Aaron could point to and explain, but because 2 people had slowly stopped wanting the same life, and only one of them had said so out loud. She lived in Scottsdale now, sent birthday cards on time and Christmas gifts that arrived late, and called Ruby on Sundays when she remembered. Ruby was 8. She had her mother's quick eyes and her father's habit of going quiet before she said something true. She drew constantly, mostly houses, always with 2 windows lit and 1 dark, though she had never explained why, and Aaron had learned not to press for answers she wasn't ready to give. Every school day he woke her at 6:40, made oatmeal because it was cheaper than cereal, and she claimed to hate it less, and dropped her at Larkspur Elementary before his 7:15 shift. The week everything changed started with a phone call. Ruby's school nurse, mid-morning on a Tuesday, told Aaron his daughter had a fever of 102 and needed to be picked up inside the hour. Aaron's direct supervisor, a soft-spoken man named Phil Antonelli, who had covered for Aaron more times than either of them counted, was 3 weeks into medical leave for a hip replacement. Aaron did what he always did. He texted the interim contact listed on the shift roster, lined up floor coverage from a coworker named Desmond, who owed him a favor from August, and left at 11:40 with a signed sign-out sheet in Phil's temporary binder. Nobody told him the binder had been quietly retired the week before, replaced by a digital system nobody on the floor had been trained on yet. Nobody told him Grant Sutter, 14 months into the regional director role and still learning which employees were expendable, had pulled a roster gap report that Friday, looking for exactly this kind of hole to point to. Sutter had transferred to the Larkspur region from corporate the previous September, part of a company-wide initiative called Regional Efficiency Realignment, a phrase that meant different things depending on who was explaining it. To the board, it meant trimming operating costs across the distribution network by 4% within 18 months. To Sutter, it meant a bonus structure tied directly to headcount reduction in his assigned region, $340,000 if he hit his number by the second quarter close. To the floor, it meant a man in a pressed shirt who walked through twice a week, said little, and left behind a schedule that always seemed to carry one fewer name than the month before. Aaron hadn't thought much about Sutter, beyond the ordinary caution any dock lead learns around a director who smiles at the wrong moments. He had no way of knowing his name had already been circled in a spreadsheet 3 weeks earlier, flagged under a column labeled Compensation Tier, Review, sitting 2 rows above a coworker named Desmond, and 4 below a woman in receiving named Carol, who had been with the company almost as long as the building had stood. The woman with the trash bin had started showing up at the Larkspur hub 3 weeks before the firing, part of a new custodial contract the facilities office had signed without much fanfare. She went by Peg. She was somewhere north of 70, though she moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had decided complaining about her knees wasted energy better spent elsewhere. She wore the same gray jacket every night, carried a small spiral notebook in her back pocket that she wrote in more than the job seemed to require, and said almost nothing to anyone except Aaron, and even then, not much. The first time he helped her, it wasn't a decision so much as a reflex. He was walking to his truck a little after 11 when he saw her wrestling a second bin toward the compactor. One wheel locked sideways against a seam in the concrete, and he crossed the lot without thinking about it and freed the wheel and pushed the bin the rest of the way himself. She thanked him with a nod, not a word, and he figured that was the end of it. It wasn't. Facilities had approved a headcount of 1 for nightly custodial coverage of a building that used to run 2, part of the same efficiency push that had circled Aaron's name, and one person could not reasonably move both trash lines, buff the entry floor, and restock 3 restrooms in a 6-hour shift without help. So Aaron started staying, not every night, just the nights he didn't have to be home by a certain hour. The nights Ruby was at her after-school program, until 6, and he'd already eaten dinner alone, standing at the counter. He never told anyone at work. It wasn't a secret exactly. It just wasn't anybody's business. Peg asked questions the way a person asks when she already half knows the answer and wants to hear how someone else says it out loud. She asked about the new digital sign-out system, whether the floor had actually been trained on it or just told it existed. She asked what happened to the second custodial position and whether facilities had ever explained why. She asked, one night in early November while Aaron was helping her replace a bag in a restroom bin that should have been handled by a dispenser system decommissioned 8 months earlier to save money, whether he thought the building felt more dangerous now than it had a year ago. Not dangerous, Aaron said, just tireder. Everything runs a little thinner than it used to. Peg wrote something in the notebook, a few lines, unhurried, and then she tucked it back into her jacket like it was nothing. One Wednesday, Ruby's after-school program let out early for a teacher conference day, and Aaron had no one to watch her for the 2 hours before his shift ended, so he brought her to the break room with a coloring book and a promise of drive-through on the way home. Peg found her there around 8, sitting cross-legged on a folding chair with markers spread across the table, working on a house with 2 lit windows and 1 dark. That one's not finished, Ruby said, before Peg had asked. I didn't say it was. People always look at the dark window like something's wrong with it. Peg studied the drawing for a long moment. Is there? No. It just means somebody's not home yet. Not that anything happened to them. Ruby said it like a fact she'd had to explain before, and was tired of explaining. Peg nodded slowly, the way a person nods when a sentence lands somewhere they didn't expect it to. That's a kinder way to read a dark window than most people manage. She didn't ask why an 8-year-old had a ready answer for what an unlit window meant. Aaron didn't offer one either. Some things a person keeps for the people who ask twice. There were other details, small and easy to miss if a person had no reason to be looking, and Aaron mostly wasn't. Peg knew the layout of the mezzanine offices better than a 3-week custodial hire had any business knowing. Walking hallways she was never assigned to clean like she'd memorized them decades earlier. She referred to the loading dock, once, as Bay C, an old designation from before a renovation 11 years back had renumbered everything, a detail printed nowhere in any document currently in use. And on the one evening Grant Sutter walked through on an off-hours visit, clipboard in hand, already halfway to firing Aaron though nobody knew it yet, Peg watched him from across the warehouse floor with an attention that had nothing to do with mopping. Sutter never looked at her. Nobody looks at custodial staff long enough to wonder why they're watching. There was a night, a week before any of it, when a supplier truck backed into the wrong dock, and the driver argued with the receiving clerk over a manifest neither of them could make sense of, numbers not lining up against a pallet count that had been wrong twice that month already. Peg set down her mop, walked over without being asked, and read the manifest upside down from across the counter faster than either of them had read it right side up. She found the error in 11 seconds. A transposed lot number that had been feeding the wrong inventory count into the system for weeks, and told the clerk exactly which line to flag before going back to her mop, like nothing had happened. "You used to do books somewhere," Aaron said afterward, half a joke. "Somewhere," Peg agreed, and didn't elaborate, and he let it go the way he let most things go that weren't his business to chase. What Aaron noticed was smaller and closer. Peg's hip bothered her more on cold nights. She skipped dinner more often than she should, and the ride she was supposed to have waiting for her some nights simply didn't show, which left her with a 2-mile walk in November along a county road with exactly one working streetlight. The night it happened, the first week of the cold snap, her ride never came at all. Aaron found her sitting on the curb outside the employee entrance, coat pulled tight, breath fogging in front of her, phone in her hand with a screen that had stopped changing 10 minutes earlier. "He's not coming," she said, before Aaron asked. "Family thing. I told him not to worry about it. How far's your place?" "Farther than I'm walking tonight, apparently." He drove her. She gave directions in short sentences, the kind that assumed he wouldn't need the long version, and they arrived at a modest apartment building on the far side of Larkspur. Nothing about it remarkable. Nothing about it matching whatever Aaron might have guessed if he'd been guessing, which he wasn't. "You didn't have to do that," Peg said, hand on the door. "You didn't have to fix that bin wheel by yourself for 3 weeks either." Seemed like a wash. She almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a full smile he'd seen from her. "You've got a kid who draws unlit windows and calls it kindness instead of a mystery." "Where'd that come from?" "Her mother, mostly by leaving. The rest I don't know. Some kids just come out generous. Feels unearned, watching her be better at it than I am." Peg looked at him a second too long, the way a person looks at something they're deciding whether to keep. "It's not unearned," she said. "It's inherited." She got it from somewhere close by. Then she thanked him again and went inside, and Aaron drove home not thinking anything of it at all. He was fired 6 days later, on a Tuesday morning, in front of the whole shift, for a roster gap a decommissioned binder had swallowed, and a new system had never been trained to catch. Sutter's letter cited unauthorized shift abandonment. Nobody used the words sick daughter, or 9 years, or covered his own gap before he left, because none of it mattered to the sentence Sutter had already written before the meeting started. The unemployment claim took 4 minutes to file online and 6 weeks to resolve, because Sutter's office contested it that same afternoon, citing gross misconduct, a classification that meant no benefits until a hearing cleared it. Aaron didn't have 6 weeks. He had a mortgage payment due on the 14th and a daughter who needed new sneakers because the ones from September had a sole coming loose at the toe. He took work where he found it, mostly delivery routes through an app that paid by the drop and didn't care about references, driving until 11 most nights and still, twice that first week, finding himself parked outside the Larkspur hub around the time Peg's shift would be starting. Engine off, telling himself he was just checking the mail at the post office 2 blocks over. The sneakers waited another 2 weeks. Aaron sat at the kitchen table one Sunday with the mortgage statement, the delivery app's weekly payout, and a calculator, moving the same $40 between 3 columns until the math finally allowed for new shoes without touching the electric bill. Ruby never asked why he'd started packing her lunch instead of buying it, or why the drive-through promise had quietly become a once-a-month thing instead of a Friday thing. She noticed. She just didn't say it the way an adult would have, with a complaint attached. She said it the way she said most things, sideways, folded into some other sentence that made it easier for both of them to survive. "Can we get the shoes with the light-up soles this time?" she asked. "Or is that a birthday thing?" "That's a birthday thing," Aaron said, and hated how easily the answer came, how practiced the sentence already was. She wasn't there the second time, or the third. He asked Desmond about it in a text. Casual, not wanting to seem like it mattered as much as it did. Desmond didn't know much, only that facilities had swapped custodial contractors the week before, citing a scheduling conflict nobody explained further, and the new crew didn't include a woman named Peg. What Aaron didn't know, and wouldn't for another 2 weeks, was that Grant Sutter had noticed the same thing everyone on the floor had started to notice, that the janitor asked too many questions, wrote too many notes, and had been seen more than once talking to a fired employee like she had some reason to care. Sutter didn't know who she was. He simply decided she was a liability. The kind of loose variable a man protecting a $340,000 bonus doesn't leave sitting around, and he made a call to the contracting agency that ended her assignment without ceremony. He had, without realizing it, just fired the majority owner of the company he worked for. Renata Cho had worked in Draymond's regional HR office for 6 years, long enough to recognize a termination file that didn't add up when she saw one. Erin's file crossed her desk twice, once for standard exit processing, and again 3 weeks later when the unemployment office requested documentation for the contested hearing. The second time, she actually read it. The roster gap Sutter cited was real. So was the sign-out sheet Erin had filed with Phil Antonelli's now-defunct binder, a physical document still sitting in a supply closet nobody had cleaned out since the digital system launched. Renata found it on a Thursday afternoon, signed, dated, time-stamped 11/40, matching Erin's account exactly, and contradicting the version in Sutter's termination letter. She sat with it for 2 days before doing anything, because doing something meant putting her own name next to a director's decision. And directors who padded their bonus numbers by trimming senior staff did not, in her experience, take kindly to junior HR generalists who noticed. But she kept thinking about 4 other names she'd quietly cross-referenced against the same roster report Sutter had pulled the month he fired Erin. 4 employees, each flagged in the same spreadsheet column, each terminated within 8 weeks of one another, for infractions that, read individually, looked reasonable, and read together, looked like a pattern built to hit a number by the second quarter close. $340,000. That was the bonus tied to Sutter's headcount target, a figure Renata found buried in a compensation memo she wasn't supposed to have access to, forwarded to her inbox 11 months earlier by a since-departed coworker who'd apparently thought someone, someday, might need it. She didn't send it anywhere yet. She kept the copy and waited, the way people wait when they've decided to do the right thing, but haven't decided when. If you're still with this story, you already know it's about to turn. Take a second to like this video and subscribe to Hidden Ledger, because what Grant Sutter still doesn't know is worth more than the bonus he's chasing. Every account settles eventually. Keep watching to see how this one does. At home, Ruby noticed things her father thought he was hiding well. She noticed he checked the mailbox twice some days. She noticed the grocery bags got lighter, and the drive-through promises got rarer. She noticed, most of all, that he'd stopped talking about the lady from work with the notebook, the one whose bin wheel he used to complain about fondly, like the complaining was its own kind of affection. Did Peg get fired too? Ruby asked one night, halfway through oatmeal she still claimed to hate. I don't know, Erin said, which was true. I hope not. You should find out. You always say don't leave people wondering. He had said that, more than once, usually about something smaller, a forgotten thank you note, or an unreturned call. He hadn't expected his daughter to file it away and hand it back to him exactly when he needed to hear it. He didn't find out for another 9 days, not until a certified letter arrived at his apartment, with the Draymond Logistics corporate letterhead across the top, requesting his presence at regional headquarters in Larkspur the following Monday, 10 a.m., regarding an internal review of employment matters within the distribution division. Erin assumed it was about the contested unemployment hearing. He wore his one collared shirt, the one from Ruby's kindergarten graduation, and drove to a building he'd never once had reason to enter in 9 years of working 2 miles from it. The lobby of Draymond's regional headquarters was smaller than he expected, quiet in a way that felt deliberate. A single receptionist checked his name against a list and directed him to a second-floor conference room without asking a single question. He sat in the hallway for 4 minutes, running through every version of what an internal review of employment matters might mean. None of them good. When the door opened, it wasn't a lawyer or an HR director standing there. It was Peg. She wasn't wearing the gray jacket. She had on a plain navy sweater and slacks, nothing that announced anything, and for half a second Erin's brain simply refused to reconcile the 2 versions of her standing in front of him. You're supposed to be cleaning the mezzanine right about now, he said, because it was the only sentence available to him. I retired from that about 2 weeks ago. Sit down, Erin. He sat. She sat across from him, folded her hands on the table the same unhurried way she used to fold a trash bag before sealing it, and didn't make him wait for it. My name is Eloise Whitcomb, she said. I founded this company 41 years ago, out of a single flatbed truck my husband and I couldn't quite afford. I own 61% of it. For the last 5 weeks, I've been working the floor of this facility under a different name because I stopped trusting what people told me about how my own company treats the people running it, and I wanted to see it without an audience. Aaron didn't say anything. There wasn't a version of the sentence that fit what he was feeling. You didn't know, Eloise said. That's the point. You helped an old woman move a trash bin for 3 weeks because it needed doing, not because you thought it would matter to anyone who could do something about it. Most people, once they find out who I am, want to know what I'm going to do for them. You never got the chance to ask, because I never told you. I want you to understand that before we go any further. Nothing that happens today is a transaction. It's a correction. A correction of what? Aaron finally managed. Of a mistake I made hiring a man who thinks people are line items. Eloise slid a thin folder across the table. Grant Sutter has spent 14 months trimming this region's headcount against a bonus structure his predecessor set up, and I approved without reading closely enough. You're one of 5 people he terminated in the last 5 months using technicalities that don't survive a second look. I know, because I asked someone in your regional HR office to look a second time. Renata's name sat on the cover page, typed neatly under a line that read "Findings prepared by." She's the reason I'm sitting here today instead of still mopping floors under a fake name, Eloise said. She found the sign-out sheet. She found the pattern. She's the only person in that building who did her job the way it's supposed to be done when nobody's watching, which is the only way I've ever trusted anyone's character. Present company included. Aaron turned the folder over once without opening it further, still trying to fit the last 5 weeks into a shape that made sense. Why do it like this? He asked. The jacket, the fake name, the trash bins. You own 61% of the company. You could have just walked the floors yourself and asked questions. I tried that for years, Eloise said. People change how they act the second they know who's watching. Not because they're dishonest, because it's human. A director stops patting a bonus in front of the founder. A supervisor remembers to say good morning. None of it tells you anything true about the building when the founder isn't there, which is most of the time. She folded her hands again. I wanted to know what this company was, when nobody thought it mattered. You showed me. Grant Sutter showed me too. I just didn't like his answer. Grant Sutter was terminated the following morning, for cause, in a meeting that lasted 11 minutes and included Eloise Whitcomb herself, though nobody outside that room ever heard exactly what was said. He forfeited a bonus he'd spent 14 months engineering and left the building the same way he'd made others leave it. Badge collected, escorted to the parking lot. No clipboard required this time, because Eloise had brought her own. The 4 other employees Sutter had terminated, using the same pattern of manufactured technicalities, were contacted within the week. 2 accepted reinstatement. 1 had already found other work and settled for back pay instead, a total that came out to just under $200,000 across all 5 cases once benefits and unpaid overtime were calculated. Carol from receiving, who'd been with the company almost as long as the building had stood, cried on the phone with Renata and said she'd started to believe it was just bad luck. 4 decades of good work undone by a man who'd been there 14 months. Aaron's own settlement included $46,000 in back pay and benefits, a formal letter clearing the gross misconduct classification from every record that had ever carried it, and a job offer that wasn't the one he'd left. Eloise held a single all-hands meeting at the Larkspur Hub the following Friday, standing on the dock in a coat instead of a podium. No microphone, just her voice carrying over 40 employees who had no idea, until that morning, who Peg had actually been. She didn't mention Sutter by name. She said only that the region's staffing decisions over the past year had not reflected the company's actual values, that this had been corrected, and that anyone who had watched a coworker treated unfairly and said nothing out of fear of being next would not be blamed for it, because the fear had been reasonable and the company had earned it. Carol cried again, standing near the back by the pallet racks, and this time it wasn't from disbelief. Desmond found Aaron afterward and didn't say much, just gripped his shoulder once, the kind of gesture that meant more coming from a man who rarely offered one. I don't want your old position back, Eloise told him, the second time they met, this time in an office that had clearly always been hers, whatever name had been on the door while she wore a gray jacket at night. I want to build something out of what you actually did. A real second custodial position, restored, properly staffed and equipped. The maintenance budget Sutter cut, put back where it should have been years before he ever set foot in this region. And I want someone running floor-level culture reviews across every regional hub who already knows what it looks like when people are quietly running a building on less than it needs. That's not a demotion from dock lead Aaron. It's a job nobody's ever had before, because nobody's ever done what you did for 3 weeks without being asked. Aaron thought about it for exactly as long as it took to picture Ruby's face when he told her. What's it called? I don't know yet. What would you call it? He thought about the 2-mile walk in November, the bin wheel stuck against the curb, the notebook she'd never once let him read. The second bin, he said, because somebody should always be checking whether there's a second one that needs carrying, even when nobody assigned it to them. Eloise wrote it down. It was the first time Aaron had seen what was actually in that notebook, and it was exactly what he'd have guessed. Names, dates, small kindnesses nobody thought anyone was counting. He started the new role 3 weeks later, splitting his time between the Larkspur hub and 2 neighboring facilities, carrying a badge that read Floor Culture and Standards. Regional. Eloise's board approved the position without much debate once the story of the last 2 months made its way through the company, quietly at first and then not quietly at all. Renata was promoted into a newly created compliance role, reporting directly to corporate HR, real authority behind the title this time, the kind that came with the power to flag a pattern before it cost someone their unemployment claim and 6 weeks of sleep. Draymont Logistics issued no public statement about Grant Sutter. Eloise decided, and told Aaron so plainly, that some corrections don't need an audience to be real. What the company did announce, 3 weeks later, in a short internal memo that somehow found its way onto every break room bulletin board across the regional network, was a restored maintenance staffing minimum for every facility, a new anonymous reporting line for safety and scheduling concerns, and a floor-level review program launching in January under the name the Second Bin Initiative. The first review happened at a distribution hub 200 miles east of Larkspur, a building Aaron had never set foot in before, where a night shift receiving clerk had been quietly covering a coworker's hours for 3 months without anyone in management noticing the coworker had stopped showing up entirely, too proud to explain that a car repossession had left her without a way to get to work. Aaron didn't fix it himself. He wasn't there to fix things. He was there to notice them, the way Peg had noticed a bin wheel stuck against a curb, and to write it down in a notebook that was starting, slowly, to fill the way hers once had. Renata sent him a photo a month into the new role, taken from her desk, of the compensation memo she'd once kept quietly in a folder marked only with a date. It now sat framed on the wall of the regional HR office, not as decoration, she wrote, but as a reminder that the numbers on a spreadsheet always belonged to somebody. Aaron brought Ruby to the Larkspur hub on a Saturday in December, mostly because she'd asked twice and he'd run out of reasons to say not yet. Eloise met them in the lobby, out of the gray jacket for good now, though Aaron noticed she still carried a small notebook in her coat pocket out of habit. "You're the drawing girl," Eloise said. "You're the janitor lady who's actually rich," Ruby said, matter of fact, the way she said most things. "I prefer founder," Eloise said, "but I'll allow it." Ruby studied her for a moment, the same unhurried study Eloise had once given her houses full of dark and lit windows. "Is Peg gonna get a raise too?" Eloise laughed, a real laugh, the kind Aaron hadn't heard from her once in 5 weeks of watching her push a mop through fluorescent light. "Peg already got everything she needed," she said. "She just didn't know it until somebody stayed late enough to help her carry it." Ruby considered that, looked between them, then back down at the lobby tile like it might need fixing too. "You should get 2 bins now," she said, "so nobody has to stay late alone. Thank you for staying with this story all the way through." If it reminded you that the smallest kindness is often the one somebody's quietly keeping count of, subscribe to Hidden Ledger and tell us in the comments what you would have done in Aaron's place. Every account settles. We'll see you in the next one.